first time the motion sensor pinged at precisely 3:07 a.m., James Miller had dismissed it as a glitch, maybe a moth confused by the infrared, or perhaps a sudden shift in the humid Texas air that perpetually hung heavy over the Woodlands subdivision. He had installed the Ring device, a sleek, black Sentinel mounted beside his polished mahogany front door, primarily to deter the occasional opportunistic package thief, certainly not to document an act of profound, repetitive strangeness. This was a neighborhood defined by meticulous lawn care, HOA compliance, and the monotonous safety of middle-class expectation. Nothing truly unsettling was supposed to happen here, especially not with the punctuality of a Swiss railway schedule. But the alert returned the next morning, and the morning after that. 34 consecutive nights. Not 3:06 and 45 seconds. Not 3:08. The timestamp was immutable. 3:07 a.m. The initial footage, the archive that James and his wife Sarah would later upload anonymously before vacating the property, begins with a silent flicker. The moment the camera transitions from low-power monitoring to active recording, at 3 hours 7 minutes and 0 seconds a.m., in the monochrome, slightly fisheye view of their porch, a figure materialized at the edge of the frame, emerging from the dense shadows cast by the mature oak tree flanking their driveway. The figure was indistinct, cloaked in darkness that seemed to absorb any ambient street lighting. It possessed a generally humanoid silhouette, tall, perhaps 6 feet, but lacked any defining features that would mark it as male or female, old or young. It wore nothing recognizable as specific clothing, merely appearing as a columnar absence of light against the slightly brighter background of their pale brick house. The process was always identical, a chillingly efficient ritual of non-interaction. The figure would glide forward. Did UN seem to walk so much as maintain a uniform speed until it reached a small ornamental welcome mat positioned directly beneath the camera lens. It would stop precisely 2 feet from the door, and then it would stand, completely, terrifyingly still. For exactly 120 seconds 2 minutes, the figure occupied the screen. It didn't fidget, scratch, sway, or breathe. It was a statue carved from negative space, facing the door without making any discernible attempt to knock, peer through the sidelights, or tamper with the lock. James and Sarah, reviewing the first week's worth of recordings, initially checked the audio for heavy breathing or low muttering, but found only the high-pitched, almost imperceptible hum of the camera's electronics and the distant chirping of crickets. Nothing else. Just the silence of a suburban night punctuated by a 2-minute intrusion. At 3 hours, 9 minutes, and 0 seconds a.m., the second, more disturbing phase of the routine began. Without turning, without any preparatory movement, the figure would begin to move in reverse. It walked backward, mirroring its approach, moving at the exact same uniform speed until it dissolved once more into the shadow of the oak tree. The moment the silhouette vanished fully from the edge of the frame, the camera would automatically cease recording, and silence would return. The sequence was so mathematically precise, so devoid of human error or random variation, that it immediately negated any simple explanation involving a prankster, a drunkard, or a mentally disturbed neighbor. The Millers began investigating around night 8. They checked the lawn every morning. The grass was meticulously maintained by their landscaper and held morning dew beautifully. Yet where the figure had stood, and where it had traversed backward across the freshly dewed turf, there were no depressed blades, no smudge marks, absolutely no footprints. It was as if the figure exerted no discernible weight. James, an engineer by trade, escalated his testing. He strung thin, almost invisible fishing line across the porch on night 12, running it just inches above the ground where the figure's feet would pass. The line remained undisturbed. He placed a small unsecured garden gnome, heavy enough to require effort to move, directly in the path on night 15. The gnome was untouched, standing exactly where he had placed it, even though the figure's movements on the footage clearly showed it occupying the space where the gnome sat. This suggested the figure was either ethereal or somehow capable of phase shifting around small objects while maintaining its perfect, rigid motion path. The lack of a heat signature was perhaps the most baffling technical detail. The Ring device uses passive infrared peer sensors to detect motion based on thermal fluctuations. A human body, even lightly dressed in a cold environment, radiates detectable heat. Texas nights, even in winter, rarely drop low enough to mask thermal radiation entirely. Yet, every single night, the figure registered purely as a visual anomaly on the CMO sensor, never once triggering a thermal spike. The figure was cold, or, more accurately, its temperature matched the surrounding ambient air perfectly, rendering it invisible to the very mechanism designed to detect life. By night 20, the Millers were exhausted, living in a constant state of anticipatory dread. They had tried waiting up, sitting in the living room, lights off, pressed against the window, but every time 3:07 a.m. would arrive, and the figure would already be standing there, they could never catch the approach. If they blinked or turned away for a second, even if they were staring directly at the spot where it appeared, the process seemed to start instantly, as if the camera was capturing a moment already in progress rather than a continuous sequence. It was a visual jump cut, synchronized perfectly to 3:07 a.m. 25, Sarah, driven to a point of near hysteria, decided to break the script. While the figure was frozen in its 2-minute vigil, she began shouting through the heavy front door, pounding on the wood. "Go away. We see you. Leave us alone." The figure did not react. Not a tremor, not a shift in posture. It maintained its rigid stance until 3 hours, 9 minutes, and 0 seconds a.m., then executed its flawless backward retreat. The attempted interruption had failed entirely. It was, the Millers realized, impervious to noise, light, or desperate human appeal. The progression reached its zenith on night 30 when James finally called the police. 2 uniformed officers arrived first, highly skeptical, attributing the phenomena to an elaborate, long-running digital hoax perpetrated by a tech-savvy neighbor. They quickly elevated the case to Detective Rodriguez, a seasoned investigator known for his skepticism and reliance on physical evidence. Rodriguez spent an entire afternoon reviewing the 30 available recordings. He noted the chilling consistency, the impossible lack of physical trace, and the absolute technical failure of the thermal sensors. He even arranged for a staked-out surveillance team equipped with professional-grade FLIR thermal cameras to monitor the Miller residence on night 32 and night 33. The outcome of the surveillance was pivotal. On both nights, the professional FLIR cameras registered nothing. The thermal environment was stable, yet the Miller's Ring doorbell, a consumer-grade device, still captured the figure exactly at 3:07 a.m. The local police equipment, designed for high-sensitivity criminal detection, failed where the cheap Wi-Fi camera succeeded. Detective Rodriguez returned on the afternoon of night 33, his professional composure utterly shattered. He stood in the Miller's kitchen, holding the thumb drive containing the digital proof, and delivered a short, sharp verdict that immediately closed the case. "We cannot investigate this further," Rodriguez stated, his voice low and tight. "We cannot investigate an entity that does not exist according to 3 independent state-certified thermal imaging devices. The reason this ring footage is unique, the reason only your asterisk camera is capturing it, is not because it's a better camera. It's because whatever this thing is, it is only registering within the proprietary digital compression matrix of the ring firmware itself. It's a data ghost. It has no physical existence in our world, only within the narrow wavelengths captured by this specific technology. We are dealing with, for lack of a better term, a digital projection, or maybe a localized failure of environmental physics. But we are not dealing with a crime or a trespasser that the police have jurisdiction over." He then added the detail that made the Millers decide to pack their bags immediately: the anomaly on the tape. The figure, we ran its exact dimensions and pattern of movement against a highly sophisticated behavioral mapping algorithm. It concluded that the actions, the precise halt, the duration, the movement backward, they are not typical of surveillance behavior. They are typical of asterisk, data collection, asterisk. It is a perfectly executed scan, performed nightly. They were being studied. The final night, night 34, arrived. The Millers had already placed their house on the market, the stress having rendered their suburban dream toxic, but they had one final, desperate decision to make. They had documented 34 nights of flawless ritual. They had the police's chilling assessment. Now, the variable they had been forbidden to touch by every fiber of their rational fear, the door itself, remained. At 3:06 a.m., James and Sarah stood in the dark hallway, their hands clasped. They could hear the faint high-frequency signal noise from the camera mounted outside. They knew that in 60 seconds, the figure would appear. They knew that for the next 2 minutes, it would stand there, waiting. They decided they would not wait for 3:09 a.m. They would break the cycle completely. As the clock rolled over, 3 hours, 7 minutes, and 0 seconds a.m., the figure was instantly present, standing in the cold light of the infrared beam. It was dark, silent, and motionless. James took a deep breath. Sarah squeezed his hand, and ignoring every primitive instinct screaming at them to remain locked inside, James reached out, gripped the polished handle, and without a moment's hesitation flung open the heavy front door. The abrupt, jarring sound of the mechanism was deafening in the still night. For the first millisecond, the camera captured the interior hallway light splashing outward onto the porch. Then, in the immediate, blinding flood of real light, the image stabilized, freezing the impossible collision of worlds. The figure, now visible not through a camera lens, but through the literal open doorway, was still there, standing rigid, facing the entrance. But its stillness was broken, only for a fraction of a second, as the infrared vision of the camera captured the immediate, unprecedented physical reaction to the interruption. What happened next, captured on the final, terrifying video clip, was the reason the Millers fled the woodlands forever. When they finally uploaded all 34 nights, followed by the definitive final 35th recording, the accompanying text was stark. "The pattern always stops when you disrupt the loop. Watch what happens when they finally open the door."